performer. Really, it doesn't even matter how their performance is, as long as they finish on time.
The next person coming up, you may have seen before if you have been on any of the JoCo cruise crazies. He's a good friend of mine. We actually spent some time this summer, this most recent summer, making a Christmas album together. That was a great deal of fun. It was such an admirer of his songwriting ability that it was a real treat, and also kind of terrifying to write songs with him, but very proud of what we did. He is not going to play any of those songs because all of his songs that he did by himself are much better. Will you please welcome to the stage Mr. John Roderick.
The stage is a fucking shambles. That's right. I shouldn't even be touching this shit. Where are the union stages? Is it two? Let's get off to a good start, you and I, audience. I'm not a nerd. I have no idea what I'm doing here. I'm going to spend most of tonight's show berating you, and then the rest of it I will be tuning my guitar. I will play exactly 1.5 minutes of music. That's right, I'm going to just do the classics, that 1.5 minutes of my music that is good. I'm happy to be here. What the? It's tough to have standards. I'm sure Paul and Storm can work like this. They just put a panty on their head. That's right. Burn. All right, I don't know if you are aware, but I have a podcast now, in addition to being an internationally famous rock musician. And so I figured for the cruise this year, I would also, before I played a song, I would favor you with a story, much like the kinds of stories that I tell on my podcast. On my podcast, I have a co-host, an interlocutor, who has attention deficit disorder and self-medicates with Ritalin that he buys on the internet. That's right. Since he's not here, you're going to have to just suffer my long, boring storytelling without any interruptions or clarifications or Wikipedia searches, although you can search on your own while I speak. I'm going to tell you the story of the time I stole my dad's airplane. True story. I grew up flying airplanes. I grew up in Alaska. My dad was a pilot. And flying airplanes was a thing that we did together, like a father-son activity. Because we didn't play sports or hunt or do the other things that Alaskan men do to bond. My dad's toolbox was a paper bag that had like 3 screwdrivers in it. And he would pull that out whenever something broke. And we would both look at the 3 screwdrivers and then throw the thing away. But we did fly, we flew airplanes together, and so when I got to be a teenager, it was assumed that I would become a private pilot, because that is both our father-son activity and also a rite of passage in Alaska. You become a pilot at a certain point, because otherwise you can't go anywhere in Alaska. There are no roads, there's no other way to visit places. And Alaskans are, most of them are gasoline people. If you can put gasoline in it and drive it over things and kill things with it, Alaskans will buy it and love it. And we didn't have any of those things. We weren't snowmobile people, we weren't jet ski people, we just had this airplane. It was our one little gizmo. So after I graduated from high school, I started taking flight lessons. And I had a cranky old pilot who we would fly out to an abandoned airstrip, and we would just fly around. And he would, talk to me in the headphones and tell me what I was doing. And I was so bored with this up and, touch and go style of learning to fly, because I wanted, my primary interest in flying an airplane was to fly 50 feet above the trees and going. That's basically the way I communicate. One finger or two fingers. So I went through the rigmarole. I wasn't a very good student, but I did get to the point that I soloed the airplane and had my first flight where I was all by myself. And it seemed we'd been flying in and out of this abandoned airstrip for weeks, so I felt very comfortable here. And I successfully soloed. I was a proper student aviator now. There's a whole tradition where they rip the back of your shirt and write the day that you solo for the first time and pin it on the wall of the hangar. And we didn't really do any of that. The guy was too crotchety. But I felt very confident because I'd grown up in airplanes, and now I had soloed and flown a plane by myself. I felt pretty much that I was a pilot. I was going to be a great pilot, I knew, and it was just a matter of the few details of flying for many years before I became a great pilot, but I felt like I was on the way. And so about a week later, I was sitting at home, and I really wanted to show off this new skill, my flying skill, but I knew that my dad wasn't going to let me go fly by myself around the town. So one afternoon I made sure that he was otherwise occupied in his room reading spy novels as he did, and I went downstairs and took the key to the airplane off of the refrigerator. And then, because I was a teenager, I called a good friend of mine, my friend Peter, and I said, "Meet me at the airport. I got my pilot's license. Let's go for a flight." And he was like, "You got your pilot's license? That's incredible." Yeah, I mostly got my pilot's license. So we met at the airport, and I'd been through this process a million times. I knew exactly how to look like a pilot and sound like a pilot. So we unhooked the straps and did a pre-flight check of the airplane, and I was very officious about all my little, yes, that's right, really convincing my friend Peter that I was on top of my game. And we got in the airplane and started up the propeller, and I got on the radio to the tower, and I deepened my voice. I said, "Merrill Tower, this is Cessna 634 Mike Alpha, ready for takeoff, runway 2. Sounding as much like an Alaskan as I could muster at the time, because my voice was an octave higher then. And I seemed to be pulling it off. The tower responded to me like they do to Alaskan pilots. They gave me my clearance to take off. And we taxied out onto the runway, and brimming over with confidence and youthful sort of masculinity, I slammed the throttle forward, and the plane starts off down the runway. And Peter is also, he's a cool kid, I'm a cool kid, we're going for a flight. We're 18 years old, and of course, as you know, when you're 18, you feel like you have seen it all, and you are a full-grown adult. And this seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Well, we start cooking down the runway, and I don't want to insult your intelligence by telling you how to fly a plane. But when a plane is on the ground, you control it with the foot pedals, which move the rudder on the tail. And when the plane is in the air, you can steer it with the steering wheel or with the stick. But on the ground, you control it like this, with your feet. And when the propeller starts spinning really fast, it creates a kind of torque that actually pulls the plane a little bit to the left. And you correct that with a little bit of right rudder, a little opposite foot to the direction you're traveling. When we start heading down the runway, And on this day, there's a little bit of a crosswind. And so the plane starts to move to the left along the runway. We're picking up speed. And I'm noticing that we're no longer on the center line. We're sort of inching over. And the plane is really starting to cook along the runway, and I'm giving it a little bit of right rudder, but it's not really having an effect. And I'm kind of, I'm trying to be gentle with it because I want to show that I have finesse. The plane is not responding, and it keeps moving over until we're fully over on the left side of the runway, which isn't how it's done. And so I start to think about all my flight lessons, which really doesn't represent a lot of time, let's be honest. And I start to second guess what I'm doing. Maybe it's not that you give opposite rudder. Maybe it's that you give rudder on the side of the direction you're moving. At that point, maybe it's that there's a button that you push. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And so as the plane starts to get over to the left side of the runway, I now, in a little bit of a panic because we're going 80 miles an hour, I stop pushing on the right rudder and I slam my foot down on the left rudder. And the plane goes, and now we are in the grass. And going fast. And so I immediately recognize my mistake and slam my foot down on the right rudder, at which point the airplane goes up onto 2 wheels. And this wing is cutting through the grass, and this wing is pointing at the stars. And I think to myself in that brief moment, I'm going to be the kid who stole his dad's airplane and rolled it on the ground. And I say, I will not go down like this. I will not crash my dad's airplane on the ground. I will, if anything, crash it from the sky. And I pull back on the stick, and the airplane goes, and we are in the air, going sideways across the runway. But we are in the air. And let me tell you, once an airplane is in the air, it's quite easy to fly. All you have to do is keep the motor running. Well, we cleared the trees and the power lines at the end of the runway, and then we were aloft, And I looked over at my friend Peter, who had been in a great many airplanes. And he knew that wasn't how you do it. But he betrayed no outward emotion, because he was a cool kid, and so was I. And so, although I was, at this point, drenched in sweat, I shook it off, and we started flying around our town. And I couldn't resist a little like, there's your house. There's my house. But Peter wasn't responding. He was just looking out the window, kind of ashen. And in actual fact, now I had only one thing I needed to do, which was land the airplane. But I had completely lost all of the Dutch courage that I had used to get us into the air. And so we spun the plane around, and we could see the runway. It was calling to us. Peter knew that we were in trouble. And I really knew we were in trouble. And I lined up on the strip. And again, this part of flying is not that hard. You just point at the center line, and you gradually take the power away, and the plane will go down. And I was handling that part pretty carefully. But I had in my mind a vision of me crashing my dad's plane at the end of the busiest small plane airport in America, Merrill Field in Anchorage, Alaska. And how my name would ring out forever, the rest of my life. It didn't matter if I lived or died. John Roderick would be the kid who crashed his dad's plane. Well, I lined up on the end of the strip, and I was doing just fine, doing just great, until the wheels touched it down on the runway. Immediately the plane started to go to the left. And by this point in time, I didn't know whether it was a trick runway. I wasn't sure what was happening. I had no confidence in any of my controls. And so I was just pushing both pedals back and forth, and the plane was... And I finally brought it to a stop, half on the runway, half off. And the guys in the tower said, 634 Mike Alpha, you all right, son? Roger. I taxied the plane over. Peter and I got out, not speaking a word. Tied the plane up. And I never flew an airplane again. That was the end of my career as a pilot. It is a sad story. I left Alaska. I never really... So, anyway, later on in the cruise, I'm going to take a stab at steering the boat. So hold on, everybody.